The crystal chandelier, a relic from a bygone era, cast fractured light across the room, each glint a tiny shard of unease mirroring the turmoil in Richard Harding's heart. He sat at the mahogany desk, the weight of his empire pressing down. On him, a familiar burden, yet tonight it felt different, heavier. It wasn't the usual stress of billion-dollar deals or the relentless demands of running Harding Industries. This was something personal, something that gnawed at the edges of his carefully constructed world, threatening to unravel the very fabric of his existence. He'd always prided himself on his intuition, a sixth sense honed by years of navigating treacherous business landscapes. But lately, that instinct had been screaming, a silent alarm he couldn't quite decipher. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the silver strands catching the light, making him look older than his 60 years. The house was quiet, unnervingly so. His wife, Elena, was out at a charity gala, a world he'd grown increasingly detached from, a world of glittering surfaces and hollow smiles. His son, Michael, was away at college, chasing dreams that seemed increasingly distant from the Harding legacy. And then there was Lily, Elena's niece, a bright, observant child of 7 who had come to stay with them after a family tragedy. It was Lily who had planted the seed of doubt, a tiny, fragile thing that had taken root and begun to bloom into a terrifying possibility. He remembered the scene vividly. Lily, perched on his knee in the sun-drenched conservatory, her small hand clutching a stuffed bear. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were clouded with a fear that didn't belong on a child's face. "She's plotting to take your house," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the air conditioning. "Aunt Elena. She talks to people when you're not around, they whisper about taking everything." He'd dismissed it at first, attributing it to a child's overactive imagination, a misunderstanding of adult conversations. But the look in her eyes, the palpable fear, it had stayed with him, a persistent, nagging doubt. He'd always known Elena was ambitious, drawn to the power and prestige that came with being Mrs. Richard Harding. But he believed, perhaps naively, that there was genuine affection, a shared understanding that transcended the superficial allure of wealth. Now Lily's words echoed in his mind, painting a disturbing picture of a woman he thought he knew, a woman who might be capable of anything. The thought was sickening, a betrayal that cut deeper than any business deal gone sour. He'd built his empire on trust, on loyalty, on the belief that those closest to him were allies, not adversaries. The prospect of that foundation crumbling was terrifying. The crystal decanter on the desk beckoned, a silent invitation to numb the rising panic. With a generous pour of aged whiskey, but he resisted. He needed clarity, not oblivion. He needed to see the situation with a cold, calculating eye, the same eye that had made him a force to be reckoned with in the corporate world. He reached for the phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed the number of his long time. Lawyer David Stern. David was more than just a legal advisor. He was a confidant, a trusted friend who had seen him through countless battles, both professional and personal. "David," he said, his voice low and urgent, "I need you here, tonight. It's complicated." As he waited for David to arrive, Richard stared out the window at the sprawling estate, the manicured lawns and meticulously maintained gardens, a testament to his success. But tonight, the beauty felt hollow, tainted by the insidious suspicion that had taken root in his heart. This wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal, about the shattering of illusions, about the fight to protect everything he had worked for, not just for himself, but for his legacy. He knew with a chilling certainty that he was entering a war, a clandestine battle against an enemy he couldn't yet identify, an enemy who was operating from within his inner circle. And he knew, with equal certainty, that he would do whatever it took to win. The game had changed, the stakes were higher than ever, and Richard Harding was ready to play. David arrived an hour later, his face etched with concern. The rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside Richard. David, a man of meticulous habits and unwavering loyalty, listened intently as Richard recounted Lily's whispered warning, his voice tight with suppressed anger and disbelief. David's initial skepticism slowly gave way to a professional gravity. As Richard detailed the subtle shifts in Alana's behavior, the hushed phone calls, the clandestine meetings he'd dismissed as social engagements, he remembered Alana subtly probing about his will, his estate planning, questions that now seemed laden with sinister intent. A crucial layer to consider is the intricate dance of power and dependency that often exists within wealthy families. Richard, accustomed to being in control, the architect of his own destiny, found himself in a vulnerable position, reliant on those closest to him for emotional support and companionship. Alana, in turn, had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle, a level of luxury that was entirely dependent on Richard's wealth. This created an imbalance, a potential breeding ground for resentment and manipulation. It's a delicate interplay where love can become entangled with ambition and loyalty can be compromised by greed. Consequently, Richard and David began to dissect Alana's social circle, scrutinizing her relationships with friends and acquaintances, searching for any hint of collusion, any sign of a conspiracy. They delved into her financial records, examining her spending habits, looking for any unusual transactions, any hidden accounts. The process was painstaking, invasive, and deeply unsettling. He felt like he was violating Alana's privacy, but the stakes were too high to ignore the possibility of betrayal. He thought of his late father's cautionary tale: trust, but verify. It was a lesson he had learned early in life, a principle that had served him well in the cutthroat world of business, but one he had, perhaps foolishly, neglected in his personal life. Conversely, David suggested a discreet investigation into the Harding Industries board members. While Alana was the immediate suspect, the potential for a corporate power grab could not be discounted. Richard had made enemies over the years, ruthless competitors who would stop at nothing to gain an advantage. It was possible that Alana was merely a pawn in a larger game, a tool being used to destabilize Richard and seize control of his company. The thought was equally disturbing, a reminder of the constant vigilance required to protect his empire from external threats. To illustrate, imagine a chess game where the queen, seemingly loyal, is secretly working with the opponent to undermine the king's position. The king, blinded by trust, fails to recognize the danger until it's too late. Richard felt like he was in that very position, surrounded by potential enemies, unsure of who he could truly trust. The opulent facade of his life was crumbling, revealing a treacherous web of deceit and hidden agendas. He had to act quickly, decisively, to uncover the truth and protect himself from those who sought to destroy him. Building on this, however, Richard understood that he couldn't rely solely on legal maneuvers and financial investigations. He needed to understand Alana's motivations, to delve into the depths of her psyche and uncover the root of her discontent. Was it simply about money, or was there something more, some deeper emotional need that he had failed to recognize? He decided to confront her, not with accusations, but with genuine curiosity, with a willingness to listen and understand. It was a risky move, one that could potentially expose his suspicions and alert her to his investigation. But he felt it was necessary, a desperate attempt to salvage their relationship and uncover the truth before it was too late. As the investigation gained momentum, Richard realized the insidious nature of distrust. It wasn't merely about uncovering a plot, it was about the erosion of faith in those closest to him. He found himself questioning every interaction, scrutinizing every gesture, searching for hidden meanings where there might be none. This pervasive suspicion seeped into his relationships with his son, Michael, and even Lily, the innocent catalyst for this entire ordeal. He had to consciously fight against the urge to see them as potential informants, as pawns in Elena's alleged game. Shifting the focus, the concept of emotional accounting came to mind. In any long-term relationship, there's an unspoken ledger of emotional debts and credits. Had Richard, in his relentless pursuit of success, inadvertently created a deficit in Elena's emotional bank account? Had he neglected her needs, dismissed her aspirations, or taken her loyalty for granted? It was a painful realization, the possibility that his own actions might have contributed to the current crisis. He recalled countless evenings spent poring over financial reports instead of engaging in meaningful conversations, the missed anniversaries, the perfunctory gestures of affection. These omissions, seemingly insignificant at the time, might have festered into resentment, creating fertile ground for betrayal. Furthermore, Richard considered the power dynamics inherent in their marriage. He was the provider, the decision-maker, the one who held all the cards. Elena, while enjoying the fruits of his labor, might have felt disempowered, her voice unheard, her opinions disregarded. This imbalance could have fueled a desire for control, a yearning to carve out her own sphere of influence, even if it meant resorting to deception and manipulation. Now, consider how this applies when you face a similar power imbalance in your own relationships. Have you created an environment where your partner feels valued, respected, and heard? Or have you inadvertently fostered resentment, a desire for control? Turning to a different angle, Richard contemplated the societal pressures that might have contributed to Elena's alleged actions. The relentless pursuit of wealth and status, the superficiality of high society, the constant comparisons to other affluent couples. All these factors could have exerted a significant influence on her psyche. Perhaps she felt trapped in a gilded cage, yearning for something more than material possessions and social accolades. It was a sobering thought, the realization that even the most successful individuals are susceptible to the pressures and expectations of society. To illustrate, picture a meticulously crafted facade, a beautiful painting that conceals a crumbling wall. Elena, outwardly happy and content, might have been struggling with inner turmoil, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of perfection. The weight of expectations, the fear of judgment, the pressure to conform, all these factors could have driven her to desperate measures. Richard had to look beyond the surface, to see the woman beneath the mask, to understand the forces that might have compelled her to act in such a deceitful manner. Even so, Richard knew that understanding Elena's motivations didn't excuse her alleged actions. Betrayal was betrayal, regardless of the underlying circumstances. He had to balance compassion with accountability, empathy with a firm resolve to protect himself and his legacy. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but he was determined to navigate it with courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. The stakes were too high to allow emotions to cloud his judgment. He had to remain focused, objective, and prepared to make difficult decisions, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness. Turning his attention from the potential external threats, Richard recognized the paramount need for a candid conversation with Elena, albeit a carefully orchestrated one. He couldn't approach her with accusations, as that would immediately shut down any possibility of genuine communication. Instead, he needed to create a safe space, an environment where she felt comfortable expressing her true feelings, even if those feelings were difficult or painful to hear. This required a complete shedding of his usual authoritative demeanor, adopting instead an attitude of vulnerability and open-hearted listening. Diverging slightly, it's crucial to understand that effective dialogue, particularly in emotionally charged situations, necessitates active empathy. Richard needed to step into Elena's shoes, to see the world from her perspective, to understand her fears, her desires, and her unmet needs. This wasn't about condoning her actions, but rather about gaining a deeper understanding of the underlying motivations that might have driven her to consider such a drastic course of action. It was about recognizing her humanity, even in the face of potential betrayal. Conversely, Richard realized he couldn't solely rely on his own emotional intelligence. He needed to gather concrete evidence, to corroborate Lily's claims and to uncover the full extent of Elena's alleged plot. This meant enlisting the help of discreet investigators, individuals with the skills and resources to gather information without raising suspicion. He tasked David with finding a reputable firm, one that could operate with the utmost confidentiality and professionalism. The investigation had to be meticulous, thorough, and above all, legal. He wouldn't stoop to Elena's level, even if it meant taking a longer, more arduous path to the truth. In another vein, the concept of radical honesty came to mind. While complete transparency might seem like the ideal approach, Richard recognized that it could also be counterproductive, potentially escalating the conflict and jeopardizing the investigation. He needed to be strategic in his communication, revealing only what was necessary to elicit a genuine response from Elena, while withholding information that could be used against him. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring careful consideration of every word, every gesture, every nuance of their interaction. As a practical application, imagine a skilled negotiator entering a high-stakes deal. They wouldn't reveal their entire hand up front, but rather strategically disclose information to gain leverage and to guide the conversation in a desired direction. Richard needed to adopt a similar approach, carefully controlling the flow of information to maximize his chances of uncovering the truth. He needed to be a master of observation, paying close attention to Elena's reactions, both verbal and nonverbal, to detect any signs of deception or guilt. To illustrate, Richard decided to initiate a conversation about their future, subtly probing Elena's feelings about their marriage, their lifestyle, and their shared goals. He framed the conversation as a genuine attempt to reconnect, to rekindle the spark that had once ignited their relationship. He avoided any direct accusations, instead focusing on expressing his own feelings of disconnection and his desire to rebuild their bond. It was a risky gambit, but he hoped that it would create an opening for Elena to reveal her true intentions, either consciously or unconsciously. The key was to listen without judgment, to create a space where she felt safe enough to be honest, even if that honesty was painful to hear. In due course, Richard understood that merely uncovering Elena's potential treachery wasn't enough. He needed to examine his own complicity in creating an environment where such a betrayal could even be contemplated. Had he, in his quest for external validation and material success, neglected the emotional architecture of their relationship? He recalled a conversation with his therapist years ago, who had warned him about the dangers of emotional detachment, of building walls around his heart to protect himself from vulnerability. Had he inadvertently walled off Elena as well, leaving her feeling isolated and unloved? Considering this, it became imperative to evaluate his own communication patterns. Was he truly present during their conversations? Or was he merely going through the motions, offering perfunctory responses while his mind remained preoccupied with business matters? Did he actively listen to her concerns, or did he tend to dismiss them as trivial or unimportant? Did he validate her feelings, or did he attempt to minimize or invalidate them? These were difficult questions to confront, but essential for understanding the dynamics that had shaped their relationship. By the same token, Richard began to reevaluate his expectations of marriage. Had he subconsciously imposed unrealistic standards on Elena, expecting her to conform to his idealized vision of a perfect wife? Had he failed to recognize her individuality, her own unique needs and aspirations? Had he treated her as an extension of his own ego, rather than as a fully realized human being with her own distinct identity? It was a sobering realization. The possibility that his own rigid expectations might have stifled Elena's growth and contributed to her discontent. To that end, Richard recognized the need to cultivate a greater sense of empathy and compassion, not only for Elena but also for himself. He realized that he too was a product of his past experiences, his own insecurities, and his own unmet needs. He had learned to equate success with love, believing that material possessions and external validation would fill the void within his heart. But he now understood that true love came from within, from a deep sense of self-acceptance and self-compassion. A critical aspect, though, involved confronting his own fears of vulnerability. He had always prided himself on his strength and independence, believing that showing emotion was a sign of weakness. But he now understood that vulnerability was not a weakness, but rather a strength, a willingness to open himself up to authentic connection with others. He needed to learn to let go of his defenses, to allow himself to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved for who he truly was, flaws and all. As a result, Richard resolved to embark on a journey of self-discovery, seeking to heal the wounds of his past and to cultivate a deeper sense of self-awareness. He committed to spending more time in introspection, reflecting on his values, his beliefs, and his patterns of behavior. He sought guidance from his therapist, delving into the root causes of his emotional detachment and exploring new ways of relating to others. He realized that true love began with self-love, and that he could not truly love Elena until he had first learned to love himself. Richard pondered the very nature of commitment, a solemn vow, yet also an evolving, fluid agreement. Did the vows exchanged years prior still hold the same weight in light of changed circumstances and altered personalities? Might Elena perceive the marriage as a gilded cage, a beautiful prison that stifled her personal growth and ambitions? He considered the possibility that she wasn't driven by malice, but rather by a desperate yearning for autonomy, a misguided attempt to break free from perceived constraints. This perspective, while not excusing potential wrongdoing, fostered a sense of understanding, a recognition of the complexities inherent in long-term partnerships. Taking a different tack, he began to question the societal narrative surrounding wealth and happiness. Was their opulent lifestyle truly fulfilling, or had it become a hollow pursuit, a constant striving for more that never truly satisfied? He recalled a poignant conversation with a former colleague, a man who had amassed a considerable fortune only to discover, in his later years, that his true wealth lay in his relationships and his personal well-being. This realization prompted Richard to reevaluate his own priorities, to consider whether he had sacrificed genuine connection on the altar of material success. He thought of the ancient proverb, "He who dies with the most toys is still dead." Contemplating further, Richard started to investigate the concept of forgiveness, not just forgiving Elena, should her actions warrant it, but also forgiving himself for the mistakes he had made in their relationship. Resentment, he knew, was a corrosive force, capable of poisoning even the most resilient bonds. Holding on to anger and bitterness would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and distrust. Embracing forgiveness, on the other hand, could pave the way for healing and reconciliation, even if it meant accepting that their marriage might never be the same. On a parallel note, Richard began to explore the notion of personal responsibility. Regardless of Elena's motivations or actions, he recognized that he had a responsibility to protect himself and his legacy. He couldn't afford to be naive or complacent. He needed to take proactive steps to safeguard his assets and to ensure that his future was secure. This meant consulting with legal and financial experts, reviewing his estate plan, and making necessary adjustments to protect his interests. Bearing this in mind, Richard also considered the potential for a mutually beneficial resolution. Instead of engaging in a protracted and acrimonious legal battle, might there be a way to reach a compromise that satisfied both parties? Perhaps Elena was seeking a greater degree of financial independence, or a more fulfilling sense of purpose in her life. If so, Richard might be willing to provide her with the resources and support she needed to pursue her own goals, provided that she was willing to be honest and transparent about her intentions. Now, think about your own relationships. When facing conflict, do you focus solely on your own needs and desires, or do you also consider the perspective of the other person? Are you willing to compromise, to negotiate, to find a solution that benefits both parties? Remember, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, understanding, and a willingness to work together to overcome challenges. They are not about winning or losing, but rather about creating a partnership that supports the growth and well-being of both individuals. Richard, fortified by introspection, recognized at critical juncture the need to establish an unimpeachable sanctuary for Lily. Her innocence had inadvertently thrust her into the vortex of adult intrigue, making her a potential target, a pawn, in a game she couldn't possibly comprehend. His immediate duty was to shield her from the fallout, to create an environment where she felt safe, secure, and unconditionally loved, regardless of the unfolding drama. He resolved to engage a child psychologist, someone adept at navigating sensitive situations, to provide Lily with the emotional support she required. This wasn't simply about protecting her physically. It was about safeguarding her nascent psyche from the corrosive effects of distrust and uncertainty. Shifting gears, Richard pondered the legal ramifications of Elena's alleged actions, specifically the potential impact on Michael, his son. Michael, oblivious to the brewing storm, remained focused on his studies, his future seemingly secure within the Harding legacy. Yet, should Elena's plot succeed, Michael's inheritance could be jeopardized, his future irrevocably altered. Richard felt a pang of guilt, realizing that his own marital strife could inadvertently harm his son, the person he loved most in the world. He pledged to take whatever steps were necessary to protect Michael's interests, even if it meant making difficult decisions that could further complicate his relationship with Elena. In a similar vein, Richard acknowledged the importance of preserving his professional reputation. A public scandal could damage Harding Industries, erode investor confidence, and tarnish the legacy he had spent decades building. He needed to navigate this crisis with the utmost discretion, minimizing the potential for negative publicity and safeguarding the interests of his employees, shareholders, and stakeholders. This meant carefully controlling the narrative, anticipating potential leaks, and preparing a contingency plan to address any public relations fallout. Considering another angle, Richard realized the need to document everything. He meticulously recorded every conversation, every meeting, every observation that could potentially be relevant to the investigation. He understood that his memory could be fallible, and that accurate documentation would be crucial in building a solid legal case, should that become necessary. He also instructed David to maintain a detailed log of all communications, ensuring that every action was properly recorded and accounted for. Juxtaposing this with the personal, Richard began exploring alternative dispute resolution methods. Litigation, he knew, could be a long, costly, and emotionally draining process. Mediation, on the other hand, offered the potential for a more amicable resolution, allowing both parties to air their grievances and to work towards a mutually agreeable settlement. He instructed David to explore the possibility of engaging a skilled mediator, someone with experience in resolving complex family disputes. Now ponder the challenges of maintaining composure amidst chaos. Richard, accustomed to being in control, found himself grappling with feelings of helplessness and uncertainty. He realized that maintaining his emotional equilibrium was crucial, not only for his own well-being, but also for the sake of those around him. He resumed his daily meditation practice, seeking solace in the quiet stillness of his mind. He also made a conscious effort to prioritize self-care, ensuring that he got enough sleep, ate healthy meals, and exercised regularly. He understood that he couldn't effectively navigate this crisis if he was running on empty. He also started to take long walks in the garden, seeking solace and clarity in the beauty of nature. Richard turned his attention to the intricate tapestry of his social connections, recognizing that the truth might be concealed within the seemingly innocuous interactions of his inner circle. He considered the dynamics of social obligation, the subtle pressures to conform, and the unspoken rules that governed their gilded world. Might someone be acting under duress, compelled to participate in Elena's scheme against their better judgment? He recalled a recent conversation with Beatrice, a longtime friend of Elena's, who had seemed unusually anxious and withdrawn. Could Beatrice possess vital information trapped between loyalty and conscience? In parallel, Richard began to delve into the realm of nonverbal communication, studying the subtle cues and signals that often betray hidden emotions. He reread old correspondence from Elena, scrutinizing her handwriting, her choice of words, and the overall tone of her messages. He watched old home videos, paying close attention to her body language, her facial expressions, and her interactions with others. He sought the counsel of a forensic psychologist, someone with expertise in detecting deception and interpreting nonverbal cues. The psychologist provided him with a framework for analyzing Elena's behavior, helping him to identify potential inconsistencies and red flags. As a diverging observation, Richard contemplated the role of technology in uncovering the truth. He authorized a discreet review of Elena's electronic devices, including her phone, her computer, and her social media accounts. He understood the ethical implications of such an intrusion, but he felt it was justified given the potential gravity of the situation. He instructed the investigators to proceed with caution, ensuring that all actions were conducted within the bounds of the law and with the utmost respect for Elena's privacy. The digital footprint, he knew, could reveal a wealth of information, providing concrete evidence to support or refute Lily's claims. With this knowledge, Richard expanded his view to assess the broader implications for his personal well-being. He acknowledged that the stress and uncertainty of the situation were taking a toll on his physical and mental health. He experienced sleepless nights, persistent headaches, and a general sense of unease. He realized that he couldn't effectively navigate this crisis if he allowed it to consume him. He committed to prioritizing his own well-being, engaging in activities that brought him joy and relaxation. He spent time with friends, pursued his hobbies, and sought moments of quiet reflection. To illustrate, Richard recalled a cherished memory of his late mother, who had always emphasized the importance of resilience and self-care. She had taught him that even in the darkest of times, it was essential to find moments of light and joy. He channeled her wisdom, reminding himself that he had the strength and resources to overcome this challenge. He focused on the positive aspects of his life, the love of his son, the beauty of his surroundings, and the sense of purpose that came from his work. As a counterpoint, Richard understood that he couldn't completely insulate himself from the pain and uncertainty of the situation. He allowed himself to feel his emotions, to acknowledge his fears, and to grieve the potential loss of his marriage. He didn't try to suppress his feelings, but rather embraced them as a natural part of the human experience. He sought solace in his faith, praying for guidance and strength. He also reached out to a support group, connecting with others who had experienced similar challenges in their lives. Sharing his story with others helped him to feel less alone and more empowered. Richard sought counsel from Eleanor Vance, a renowned expert in family dynamics and high-net-worth divorces, known for her ability to navigate treacherous emotional waters with unmatched poise. She proposed a novel approach, a simulated separation, a trial run designed to expose underlying tensions and reveal true intentions without the irrevocable finality of divorce proceedings. This tactical maneuver, she argued, could serve as a crucible, forcing Elena to confront her desires and motivations in a controlled environment, free from the pressures of public scrutiny. The idea was audacious, fraught with risk, but it offered a glimmer of hope for a resolution that minimized collateral damage. In a similar vein, Richard began to explore the concept of conscious uncoupling, a philosophy that emphasized personal growth and mutual respect, even in the face of separation. He devoured books on the subject, attended workshops, and sought guidance from therapists specializing in this approach. He realized that even if his marriage to Elena couldn't be salvaged, he could still choose to navigate the process with grace, integrity, and a commitment to minimizing pain and suffering for all involved. This shift in perspective, from resentment to reconciliation, offered a path toward healing and closure, regardless of the ultimate outcome. Considering the potential for misinterpretation, Richard recognized the importance of crafting a clear and concise narrative, a compelling account of the events leading up to the crisis. He enlisted the help of a skilled biographer, someone adept at weaving together disparate threads of information into a coherent and persuasive story. This narrative, he envisioned, could serve as a shield, protecting his reputation and his legacy from unwarranted attacks. It could also serve as a tool for reconciliation, offering Elena an opportunity to understand his perspective and to appreciate the pain that her actions had caused. At the same time, Richard started to investigate the philanthropic endeavors that Elena had championed over the years. He discovered that she had been secretly diverting funds from a charitable foundation to a personal account, ostensibly for administrative expenses. This revelation, while not directly related to the alleged plot to seize his assets, further eroded his trust in her and reinforced his suspicion that she was capable of deceit and manipulation. He confronted her with this information, giving her an opportunity to explain her actions. Her response was evasive, further fueling his doubts. Contrasting this with the investigation into Harding Industries, Richard uncovered a series of suspicious transactions involving a key executive, a longtime confidant whom he had trusted implicitly. This executive, it turned out, had been secretly funneling money to a shell corporation controlled by a rival firm, potentially jeopardizing the company's competitive advantage. This discovery, while unrelated to Elena's alleged plot, served as a stark reminder that betrayal could come from unexpected sources, even from those closest to him. Now consider the ethical implications of wealth and power. Richard realized that his privileged position came with a responsibility to act with integrity and to use his resources for the greater good. He pledged to donate a significant portion of his wealth to charitable causes, to support organizations that were working to alleviate poverty, promote education, and protect the environment. He understood that true legacy wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but rather in the positive impact he had on the world. Now picture a labyrinth of mirrors, each reflecting a distorted image of reality. Richard found himself trapped within such a construct, struggling to discern truth from illusion. He considered the possibility that Elena's alleged plot was not a monolithic scheme, but rather a series of fragmented actions, each motivated by different factors and orchestrated by different individuals. Perhaps she was being manipulated by others, coerced into participating in a plan that she didn't fully understand or endorse. This perspective opened up new avenues of inquiry, prompting him to examine the power dynamics within Elena's social circle, searching for any signs of undue influence or coercion. A different way to look at it is through the lens of game theory. Richard realized that he was engaged in a complex strategic interaction where each player's actions were contingent upon the actions of others. He needed to anticipate Elena's moves, to predict her responses to his actions, and to develop a strategy that maximized his chances of success. This meant gathering intelligence, analyzing her patterns of behavior, and understanding her motivations. It also meant being prepared to adapt his strategy as new information came to light. Consider for a moment a high-stakes poker game. Each player is trying to bluff their opponents, to conceal their true intentions, and to gain an advantage. Richard felt like he was playing such a game, with his fortune and his future hanging in the balance. Delving further into the complexities of human behavior, Richard explored the concept of projection, the tendency to attribute one's own thoughts, feelings, and motives to others. Was he perhaps projecting his own fears and insecurities onto Elena, interpreting her actions through a lens of suspicion and distrust? Was he seeing what he wanted to see rather than what was actually there? This realization prompted him to examine his own biases, to question his assumptions, and to seek a more objective perspective. Think of a detective solving a crime. They must be careful not to jump to conclusions, to avoid confirmation bias, and to consider all the evidence before forming a judgment. Richard needed to adopt a similar approach, remaining open-minded and impartial, even in the face of compelling evidence. In another direction, Richard began to investigate the possibility of a double bluff, a sophisticated tactic used to deceive an opponent by convincing them that you are doing the opposite of what you are actually doing. Could Elena be feigning a plot to seize his assets in order to distract him from a more insidious scheme? Perhaps she was working with others to undermine his company, to steal his intellectual property, or to damage his reputation. This possibility, while seemingly far-fetched, couldn't be dismissed out of hand. He needed to consider all the angles, to explore every potential scenario, no matter how improbable. Taking a sharp turn, Richard contemplated the spiritual dimensions of the crisis. He realized that his pursuit of wealth and power had left him feeling empty and unfulfilled. He yearned for something more, something deeper, something that transcended the material world. He began to explore different spiritual traditions, seeking solace and guidance in their teachings. He meditated, prayed, and practiced mindfulness, seeking to connect with a higher power. He realized that true happiness wasn't found in external possessions, but rather in inner peace and spiritual fulfillment. Richard began to explore the realm of forensic accounting, suspecting the truth lay buried within a labyrinth of financial transactions obscured by deliberate obfuscation. He engaged a specialist, a veritable bloodhound of balance sheets, who possessed the uncanny ability to sniff out irregularities and trace hidden assets across international borders. This expert, a former federal investigator named Sarah Chun, suggested a deep dive into the Harding family trusts, meticulously examining the paper trail for evidence of malfeasance or self-dealing. She theorized that Elena, if involved in a scheme, might have leveraged these trusts to conceal her activities, exploiting loopholes and ambiguities to her advantage. Contrasting this with the more immediate domestic situation, Richard installed a state-of-the-art security system throughout the estate, complete with hidden cameras and sophisticated surveillance technology. He hired a team of former Secret Service agents to provide round-the-clock protection for himself, Lily, and Michael, should he return home. This wasn't merely a matter of physical security. It was about creating a sense of safety and control, reclaiming his dominion over his own domain. He established secure communication channels, encrypted email accounts, and burner phones, ensuring that his communications remained private and protected from prying eyes. The goal was to create a fortress, both physical and digital, shielding himself and his loved ones from potential harm. Looking at it differently, Richard started to cultivate a network of informants, discreet individuals who could provide him with inside information about Elena's activities and her relationships with others. He reached out to former employees, social acquaintances, and even some of Elena's own friends, offering them incentives to share what they knew. He understood that this was a risky strategy, fraught with ethical considerations, but he felt it was necessary to uncover the truth and protect himself from potential betrayal. He made it clear that he wasn't interested in gossip or speculation, but rather in concrete evidence and verifiable facts. In an entirely different arena, Richard immersed himself in the study of behavioral economics, seeking to understand the psychological factors that might have influenced Elena's decisions. He learned about cognitive biases, framing effects, and loss aversion, all of which could have played a role in her actions. He realized that people often make irrational choices, driven by emotions rather than logic, and that even the most intelligent individuals are susceptible to manipulation and deception. This knowledge helped him to better understand Elena's motivations and to anticipate her next move. On a more personal level, Richard embarked on a journey of self-reflection, examining his own values, beliefs, and patterns of behavior. He realized that his relentless pursuit of success had come at a cost, that he had neglected his relationships, his health, and his spiritual well-being. He resolved to make a change, to prioritize what truly mattered in life, and to live with greater intention and purpose. He started spending more time with his son, engaging in activities that they both enjoyed, and strengthening their bond. He also made a conscious effort to be more present and attentive in his interactions with others, listening more than he spoke, and showing genuine interest in their lives. Now examine how these strategies apply when you find yourself in a similar situation. Do you have the resources and the wherewithal to protect yourself and your loved ones from potential harm? Are you willing to take the necessary steps to uncover the truth, even if it means confronting difficult realities and making tough choices? Remember, self-preservation is a natural instinct, and it's important to prioritize your own safety and well-being, especially when facing a crisis. Richard considered engaging a reputation management firm to proactively shape public perception should the situation escalate. Such firms specialize in mitigating negative publicity and controlling narratives, employing strategies ranging from strategic media placements to sophisticated online monitoring. Yet, he wrestled with the ethical implications of manipulating public opinion, even in self-defense. Was it right to attempt to control the narrative, even if it meant potentially suppressing the truth? He recalled a cautionary tale of a prominent politician whose attempts to conceal a scandal only served to amplify its impact, ultimately destroying his career. The decision weighed heavily on him. He contemplated hiring a private investigator, specializing in matrimonial cases involving high-profile individuals. This investigator could discreetly gather evidence of Elena's infidelity, should it exist, providing him with leverage in any potential divorce proceedings. However, he hesitated to delve into such a personal and potentially damaging area. Was it truly necessary to expose Elena's private life, or could he achieve his goals without resorting to such invasive tactics? He remembered a piece of advice from his father: never fight dirty, even if your opponent does. The words resonated with him, reminding him of the importance of maintaining his integrity, even in the face of adversity. Richard then examined the prenuptial agreement he'd signed with Elena years prior. While it offered considerable protection for his assets, he wondered if it would withstand legal scrutiny, particularly if Elena could prove that she had been coerced into signing it, or that the terms were unconscionable. He consulted with a team of lawyers specializing in family law, seeking their expert opinion on the enforceability of the agreement. They cautioned him that the outcome was uncertain and that he should be prepared for a protracted legal battle. Consequently, Richard thought about establishing a war room, a dedicated space where he and his team could gather to strategize, analyze information, and coordinate their efforts. This war room would be equipped with state-of-the-art technology, including secure communication lines, data visualization tools, and real-time intelligence feeds. It would serve as the nerve center of his operation, allowing him to respond quickly and effectively to any new developments. However, he also recognized the potential for such a space to become a source of paranoia and anxiety, creating an atmosphere of constant vigilance and suspicion. Richard considered the ramifications for his legacy, his place in history. He pondered the legacy of Howard Hughes, a man who amassed a vast fortune, but ultimately became a recluse, consumed by paranoia and suspicion. He resolved not to let his own crisis define him, to continue to live his life with purpose and meaning, regardless of the outcome. He decided to redouble his efforts to support charitable causes, to mentor young entrepreneurs, and to contribute to the betterment of society. He wanted to be remembered not for his wealth or his power, but for his generosity, his compassion, and his commitment to making a difference in the world. Now reflect on how you might safeguard your own legacy in the face of adversity. What values do you want to be remembered for? What actions can you take to ensure that your legacy reflects those values? Remember, your legacy is not just about what you leave behind, but also about how you live your life. It's about the choices you make, the values you uphold, and the impact you have on others. It's about creating a lasting positive influence, one that extends beyond your own lifetime. Richard, ever the strategist, considered a less direct approach, subtly altering his lifestyle to observe Alana's reactions. He began divesting from certain assets, not dramatically, but noticeably, transferring funds to ostensibly less lucrative ventures and discussing these moves openly at dinner. He curtailed his spending on extravagant gifts for her, instead focusing on experiences they could share, gauging her response to the shift from material opulence to quality time. This allowed him to assess whether her interest was genuinely in their shared life or primarily in the accoutrements of wealth. If she displayed marked distress at the perceived diminishment of resources, it would serve as a telling indicator. Conversely, he also instituted a policy of radical transparency regarding his business dealings, inviting her to attend board meetings, sharing financial reports, and soliciting her input on strategic decisions. This served a dual purpose. It allowed him to assess her knowledge of and potential influence within Harding Industries, and it also provided her with an opportunity to demonstrate her loyalty and commitment to the company's success. If she displayed genuine interest and offered constructive criticism, it would suggest that she was not, in fact, plotting to undermine him. If, however, she seemed disinterested or attempted to steer him toward questionable investments, it would raise further red flags. Another crucial layer in this unfolding drama involved examining Elena's family history for patterns of behavior. Were there instances of financial impropriety or marital discord in her lineage? Did she come from a background of scarcity, which might explain a heightened anxiety about financial security? He discreetly hired a genealogist to trace her ancestry, not to unearth skeletons for blackmail, but to gain a deeper understanding of the factors that might have shaped her personality and her values. Knowledge of her familial influences could provide context for her present actions, offering insights that might otherwise remain obscured. As a contrasting strategy, Richard considered staging a false flag operation, creating a scenario where it appeared that he was facing imminent financial ruin. He could leak fabricated information to the press, suggesting that Harding Industries was on the verge of bankruptcy, or that he was being investigated for financial crimes. This would serve as a litmus test, revealing who among his inner circle remained loyal during a time of crisis and who was quick to abandon ship. It would also force Alana to reveal her hand, potentially exposing her true intentions. Another area to consider involved examining the couple's social media presence. Were there subtle signs of discord in their online interactions? Did Alana frequently post images of herself without Richard, suggesting a growing emotional distance? Did she interact with individuals who might be considered rivals or enemies? He engaged a social media analyst to monitor their online activity, looking for patterns and anomalies that might provide clues to their true feelings and intentions. Now consider how this applies if you suspect deceit in your own relationships. Are you willing to look beyond the surface, to examine the underlying factors that might be driving the other person's behavior? Are you willing to challenge your own assumptions, to question your own biases, and to seek a more objective perspective? Remember, understanding is not the same as condoning. but it is an essential first step toward resolving conflict and rebuilding trust. Richard began consulting with experts in counterintelligence, learning about techniques used by governments and corporations to detect and neutralize threats from within. He discovered the concept of honeypots, deceptive traps designed to lure adversaries into revealing their true intentions. He considered setting up a fake company, ostensibly offering Elena a lucrative business opportunity to see if she would attempt to exploit it for her own gain. This would provide him with concrete evidence of her disloyalty, while also allowing him to gather information about her co-conspirators. He then shifted his focus to understanding Elena's psychological vulnerabilities, the emotional pressure points that might make her susceptible to manipulation. He remembered a conversation they had years ago where she confided in him about her deep-seated fear of abandonment, stemming from her difficult childhood. He wondered if someone was exploiting this vulnerability, preying on her insecurities and convincing her that he was no longer worthy of her love. He decided to confront her with this issue, gently probing her feelings and offering her reassurance. As another angle, Richard looked at the possibility that Elena was suffering from a mental health issue, such as depression or anxiety, which might be clouding her judgment and leading her to act irrationally. He discreetly consulted with a psychiatrist, seeking their opinion on Elena's behavior and exploring the possibility of a medical intervention. He realized that mental illness could manifest in unexpected ways, and that it was important to rule out any underlying medical conditions before making any definitive judgments. In a different vein, Richard started to examine the legal precedents for cases involving marital fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. He wanted to understand the potential legal remedies available to him and the likelihood of success in court. He consulted with a team of litigators, exploring the various legal strategies he could pursue and assessing the strengths and weaknesses of his case. He realized that the legal process could be long and arduous, but he was prepared to fight for his rights and protect his assets. Richard commenced a review of all the employees who had access to his personal and business information, looking for any potential security breaches or leaks. He hired a cybersecurity firm to conduct a vulnerability assessment of his computer systems and networks, identifying any weaknesses that could be exploited by hackers. He implemented stronger password protocols, installed firewalls, and encrypted sensitive data, ensuring that his information was protected from unauthorized access. Now, reflect on the ethical considerations when you are facing a situation where you suspect someone close to you is being dishonest. How far are you willing to go to uncover the truth? Are you willing to compromise your own values or to violate the privacy of others? Remember, there are often no easy answers, and it is important to weigh the potential benefits against the potential harms before taking any action. Richard contemplated the potential for leveraging the element of surprise to his advantage. Rather than waiting for Elena to make her next move, he considered preemptively striking, disrupting her plans before they could fully materialize. This could involve publicly announcing his intention to donate a significant portion of his wealth to charity, thereby diminishing the potential spoils of her alleged scheme. Or he could initiate a corporate restructuring, transferring key assets to a newly formed entity, effectively shielding them from any legal claims. The key was to act decisively and unexpectedly, catching Elena off guard and forcing her to react to his moves, rather than the other way around. By way of contrast, he also explored the possibility of appealing to Elena's sense of empathy and compassion, reminding her of the love and commitment they had once shared. He could write her a heartfelt letter, expressing his pain and confusion, and pleading with her to reconsider her actions. He could arrange a private meeting where he could speak to her candidly and honestly, sharing his deepest fears and vulnerabilities. The goal was to appeal to her better nature, to remind her of the person she once was, and to persuade her to abandon her destructive path. In a similar vein, Richard began to examine the role of his own ego in the unfolding drama. Was his pride preventing him from seeing the situation clearly, blinding him to the possibility that he was misinterpreting Elena's actions? Was his need to be in control driving him to adopt a confrontational approach when a more conciliatory strategy might be more effective? He realized that his ego could be a formidable obstacle, preventing him from achieving his desired outcome. He needed to learn to let go of his pride, to humble himself, and to approach the situation with greater humility and openness. Looking at it from a different angle, Richard considered the impact of his wealth on his relationships. Had his fortune created a barrier between him and others, preventing him from forming genuine connections? Had it attracted people who were only interested in his money, rather than in him as a person? He realized that his wealth could be both a blessing and a curse, providing him with opportunities and resources, but also isolating him from genuine human connection. He resolved to be more mindful of the impact of his wealth on his relationships, and to make a conscious effort to connect with others on a deeper level, regardless of their financial status. Another key aspect involved Richard researching the psychology of manipulation and coercion. He sought out literature on the subject, studying the techniques used by master manipulators to influence and control others. He learned about gaslighting, triangulation, and other tactics used to undermine a victim's self-esteem and sense of reality. This knowledge helped him to better understand Elena's potential strategies and to protect himself from being manipulated. Now, should you suspect manipulative behavior in your own life, it's vital to be aware of these tactics. Are you able to recognize when someone is trying to gaslight you, to make you doubt your own sanity? Are you able to identify when someone is triangulating you, using a third party to create conflict and division? Remember, knowledge is power, and the more you understand about manipulation, the better equipped you will be to protect yourself from its harmful effects. Richard turned his attention to the overlooked realm of his digital security footprint. He had, in his comfort and affluence, neglected this crucial defensive perimeter. It was time for a comprehensive overhaul, beyond mere firewalls and passwords. He engaged a firm specializing in ethical hacking, experts who would simulate cyber attacks to expose vulnerabilities in his personal and corporate networks. This wasn't just about preventing data breaches. It was about identifying potential backdoors that Elena or her associates might have already exploited. The digital realm, he realized, was a battlefield as crucial as any boardroom. He then explored the concept of emotional due diligence, a rigorous self-assessment of his own emotional investments and attachments. He listed everyone in his inner circle, including Elena, and assigned each a trust score based on past interactions, observed behaviors, and gut feelings. This wasn't a scientific exercise, but rather a heuristic tool to help him prioritize his attention and allocate his emotional resources more strategically. Those with low scores were subjected to greater scrutiny, while those with high scores were given the benefit of the doubt, albeit with continued vigilance. Next, Richard considered the possibility that Elena's actions were motivated by a desire for revenge, stemming from perceived slights or injustices in the past. He delved into their shared history, searching for moments where he might have inadvertently wounded her pride or undermined her self-esteem. He recalled a particularly insensitive remark he had made at a social gathering, dismissing her artistic aspirations as a mere hobby. Could this seemingly insignificant incident have festered into resentment, fueling a desire for retribution? He resolved to apologize for his past transgressions, even if it meant swallowing his pride. In a different vein, Richard investigated the potential for using neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, to influence Elena's behavior and de-escalate the conflict. He hired an NLP practitioner to teach him techniques for building rapport, establishing trust, and subtly guiding conversations toward desired outcomes. He learned about mirroring, pacing, and leading, all of which could be used to create a sense of connection and understanding. The goal wasn't to manipulate Elena, but rather to communicate with her more effectively, fostering a sense of empathy and encouraging her to see things from his perspective. Richard commenced a review of all of his insurance policies, ensuring that he had adequate coverage for potential losses resulting from fraud, theft, or breach of contract. He consulted with an insurance broker, exploring options for adding riders to his existing policies or purchasing new policies to cover specific risks. He also examined the fine print of his policies, looking for exclusions or limitations that might affect his ability to make a claim. Now, think about how these strategies might apply when you sense dishonesty in your own life. Are you considering all possible angles, exploring both the tangible and intangible aspects of the situation? Are you willing to challenge your own assumptions, to seek out new perspectives, and to adopt a more holistic approach to problem solving? Remember, the truth is often multifaceted, and it requires a willingness to look beyond the surface to uncover the underlying complexities. Richard, contemplating the intricate dance of deception, considered the wisdom of Sun Tzu's art of war: know your enemy and know yourself. He had spent considerable energy scrutinizing Elena, but had he truly dissected his own vulnerabilities, the chinks in his armor that might make him susceptible to her machinations? He tasked his therapist with a deep dive into his attachment style, uncovering a deeply rooted fear of abandonment, masked by an outward display of self-sufficiency. This fear, he realized, might be the key to Lana's strategy, a lever she could use to manipulate his emotions and control his actions. Understanding this vulnerability was the first step toward neutralizing its power. Conversely, he explored the concept of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort experienced when holding conflicting beliefs or values. Could Elena be experiencing cognitive dissonance, torn between her desire for financial security and her moral compass? If so, he might be able to exploit this internal conflict, appealing to her sense of guilt and remorse. He could create opportunities for her to confront her own actions, forcing her to reconcile her behavior with her values. This could lead to a breakthrough, prompting her to abandon her scheme and seek redemption. Another avenue of inquiry involved examining the power dynamics within their social circle, identifying individuals who might be exerting undue influence over Elena. He recalled a recent conversation with a mutual acquaintance who hinted at Elena's growing dependence on a self-proclaimed life coach, a charismatic figure who seemed to be preying on her insecurities and encouraging her to make drastic changes in her life. Could this life coach be the mastermind behind the alleged plot, using Elena as a pawn in a larger game? He resolved to investigate this individual further, uncovering their motives and their methods. As a related idea, Richard began to study the psychology of cults and manipulative groups, seeking to understand the techniques used to brainwash and control individuals. He learned about thought reform, social isolation, and the creation of an us versus them mentality, all of which could be used to undermine a person's autonomy and critical thinking skills. He wondered if Elena had fallen under the sway of such a group, and if so, how he could help her to break free from their influence. Richard further considered the option of staging an intervention, bringing together a group of trusted friends and family members to confront Elena about her behavior and offer her support. This would require careful planning and execution, ensuring that the intervention was conducted in a safe and supportive environment, free from judgment and accusation. The goal was to create a space where Elena felt comfortable opening up about her struggles and seeking help. Now, contemplate the complexities of human relationships when you suspect deception. Are you willing to dig deep to explore the psychological and emotional factors that might be driving the other person's actions? Are you able to maintain empathy and compassion, even while protecting yourself from harm? Remember, relationships are not always black and white. and there may be underlying factors that are contributing to the situation. It is important to approach the situation with sensitivity, understanding, and a willingness to find a solution that is fair and just for all involved. Richard began exploring the realm of restorative justice, a philosophy that emphasizes repairing harm and rebuilding relationships rather than simply punishing offenders. He contacted a facilitator specializing in conflict resolution within families, someone who could guide him and Elena through a process of truth-telling, accountability, and reconciliation. This approach, he realized, was not about seeking revenge or retribution, but rather about creating a space for healing and growth. It was about finding a way to move forward, even if it meant accepting that their relationship would never be the same. The facilitator stressed that this path required both parties to be willing to take responsibility for their actions and to commit to making amends for the harm they had caused. He also delved into the study of nonviolent communication, a method of interacting that emphasizes empathy, honesty, and respect. He learned about the importance of expressing his feelings and needs without blaming or criticizing the other person. He practiced active listening, paying close attention to Elena's words and body language, and seeking to understand her perspective, even when he disagreed with her. This approach, he realized, was not about being passive or submissive, but rather about asserting his own needs and boundaries in a way that was respectful and compassionate. The key was to communicate with clarity and conviction, while also remaining open to hearing Elena's point of view. Another avenue to consider was the potential for engaging a shadow counsel, a discreet group of advisors who could provide him with objective feedback and guidance, free from the influence of his existing network. This shadow counsel would consist of individuals with diverse backgrounds and expertise, including lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, and spiritual leaders. They would meet regularly to discuss the situation, offering him different perspectives and challenging his assumptions. This would help him to avoid groupthink and to make more informed decisions. Richard contemplated the value of creating a living will, a document that would outline his wishes regarding end-of-life care should he become incapacitated. This wasn't just about protecting his physical health. It was about ensuring that his values and beliefs would be honored, even if he was unable to express them himself. He consulted with an estate planning attorney, drafting a detailed living will that specified his preferences regarding medical treatment, organ donation, and funeral arrangements. This gave him a sense of peace and control, knowing that his wishes would be respected, regardless of what the future held. He also started reviewing the history of his family's business ethics, looking for past instances where the Hardings might have engaged in questionable practices. He wanted to understand the legacy he was inheriting, and to ensure that his own actions were aligned with his values. He uncovered a scandal involving his grandfather, who had been accused of insider trading during the Great Depression. This revelation prompted him to reflect on the ethical challenges he faced in his own business dealings, and to commit to upholding the highest standards of integrity. Now, as you navigate complexities in your own life, ask yourself, are you approaching the situation with a focus on healing and reconciliation? Or are you primarily concerned with winning and punishing? Do you strive to communicate with honesty and respect? Or do you resort to blame and criticism? Remember, the choices you make in the face of adversity will define your character and shape your legacy. Reflecting on this journey so far, we perceive a landscape transformed, a terrain once familiar now rendered foreign by the shadows of doubt and the shifting sands of perception. The initial piercing alarm of betrayal has echoed through the chambers of trust, revealing not a single monolithic structure of deceit, but rather a complex ecosystem of motivations, vulnerabilities, and unforeseen consequences. It's as if we've been navigating a dense forest, initially focused on a single fallen tree blocking our path, only to gradually discover a network of tangled roots, hidden pathways, and unseen creatures shaping the entire forest floor. The Exploration has moved beyond the simple dichotomy of innocence and guilt, exposing a spectrum of human fallibility, each shade influenced by personal history, societal pressures, and the ever-elusive quest for meaning. We've witnessed the subtle corrosion of unspoken expectations, the quiet desperation of unmet needs, and the insidious power of unspoken resentments, all contributing to a climate where deception could take root and flourish. It's become clear that the pursuit of truth isn't a linear progression, but rather a cyclical process of questioning, reflecting, and revising our understanding of ourselves and those closest to us. Drawing these interwoven threads together, we begin to sense the emergence of a larger tapestry, a narrative that transcends the specifics of this particular situation and speaks to the universal human experience of connection, betrayal, and the enduring search for authenticity. The initial focus on external threats has gradually shifted inward, prompting a profound examination of personal responsibility, emotional blind spots, and the often unacknowledged costs of success. It's as if we've been peeling back the layers of an onion, each layer revealing a new level of complexity and vulnerability, ultimately leading us to a deeper understanding of our own essence. In light of these unfolding insights, the path forward is not one of simple resolution or decisive victory, but rather a more nuanced and challenging journey toward healing, forgiveness, and a renewed commitment to genuine connection. It's a recognition that even in the face of profound betrayal, the potential for growth, transformation, and a deeper understanding of the human heart remains. The challenge now lies in translating these hard-won insights into concrete actions, in choosing a path that honors both our own needs and the well-being of those around us. As we pivot toward the final reflection, consider the cumulative weight of these explorations. It is not a burden to be carried with resentment, but rather a ballast for navigating the uncharted waters ahead. It's the understanding that even in the most opulent of settings, the true treasures lie not in material possessions, but in the integrity of our relationships and the authenticity of our own hearts. The revelations unearthed serve as a compass, guiding us towards a future where genuine connection triumphs over fleeting illusions. In the quiet aftermath of such upheaval, when the dust of shattered illusions begins to settle, what remains is not merely the debris of a broken trust, but the raw material for a more resilient, more consciously constructed future. The chilling secret whispered by a child, the clandestine war waged in opulent rooms, the unraveling of a gilded facade. These are not merely plot points in a personal drama, but stark reminders of the ever-present human capacity for both profound connection and devastating betrayal. The true practice, however, begins now, not in the strategic maneuvering or the forensic accounting, but in the courageous act of facing ourselves with unflinching honesty. The wealth, the power, the sprawling estate, these are but external markers, often obscuring the deeper currents that shape our lives. The true inheritance lies in the wisdom gleaned from navigating these treacherous waters, in the capacity to cultivate empathy even in the face of deceit, and in the unwavering commitment to building relationships founded on authenticity rather than expectation. The lessons learned within these gilded walls extend far beyond the realm of billionaires and betrayals, resonating with anyone who has ever grappled with the complexities of trust, the fragility of connection, and the enduring human need for love and belonging. The temptation, of course, is to retreat into cynicism, to build impenetrable walls around our hearts, to view every gesture with suspicion. But such a response, while understandable, ultimately diminishes us, trapping us in a prison of our own making. The true challenge lies in remaining open, vulnerable, and willing to extend trust, even after it has been broken, while simultaneously cultivating the discernment to protect ourselves from harm. It's a delicate balancing act, requiring both courage and wisdom, but the rewards are immeasurable. The possibility of forging deeper, more meaningful connections with others, and the opportunity to live a life guided by authenticity rather than fear. Therefore, let the chilling whispers serve not as a source of lasting paranoia, but as a catalyst for profound self-reflection and a renewed commitment to conscious living. Let the unraveling of the facade reveal the strength of the foundations beneath, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. For in the end, it is not the wealth we accumulate or the power we wield that defines us, but the integrity with which we navigate the complexities of human connection, the compassion we extend to ourselves and others, and the unwavering commitment to living a life of purpose and meaning. The true victory lies not in reclaiming a fortune, but in reclaiming our own hearts.